Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag Gamble, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections and actions. Together we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I'd like to welcome EmmaKate Rose to the show. EmmaKate is someone who I have long admired and been inspired by. I'm just going to read some of these things because it's too many to stick in my mind, all the things you do. Apart from being a most amazing mother and climate activist and speaker and social advocate, EmmaKate is also, she leads Food Connect. And I'll let you maybe tell us a bit more about Food Connect soon, because that's an amazing part of this whole concept about changing our food system and thinking differently about the future of food and resilience in community and economy. EmmaKate is also the Executive Director of the Food Connect Foundation and is the Chair of the Queensland Social Enterprise Council, Project Manager with the Next Economy, all about transitioning communities into a post-fossil fuel economy, really, I think is where you're going with that. I know I've missed something. Also a fellow of the Eunice Centre for Social Business at Griffith University.
Yeah.
And something else that's really remarkable that I think is just opened up a huge new conversation is what you did recently with equity crowdfunding. And, you're not only doing food differently, you're doing business completely differently. And I think what why I really wanted to have this conversation, apart from the fact that I love talking with you. Every time I talk with you, I feel so uplifted. Is that there's so much about what you do and how you do it that I think is what we need to hear right now. Like as we're, right now as we're speaking, we're in the COVID-19 lockdown, and there's some really important lessons that you've experienced over the last 14 years in Food Connect that can help in the recovery, thinking differently about how we move forward from this point. But beyond COVID, it's also, I think, a really important thing to think about as we're recovering. Well, not as we're recovering, as we address climate change. The type of business that you're doing is more resilient and adaptable and flexible and caring and supporting local enterprise and local farmers. So maybe we could just start at the beginning, possibly, of just tell us a little bit about what Food Connect is about, because I think this, as a foundation of what you do, is just an extraordinary project.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Morag. It's really lovely to be on this interview. I feel very honoured to be asked, actually, because I've been also a long admirer of your work and actually have convinced my daughter to start participating in some of your programs for youth, and she was devastated the other day when she missed the 5 o'clock call. So I said, well,
she can join in next week. Actually, do you know what? There's going to be 50 people from a refugee camp in Kenya are waiting to join in too. So I'll make sure it's a link for that. Because
yeah, she'd love that. So, kudos to you as well. I think, in your own way, you're making huge changes in the world, and the ripple effects of what you do can be felt way beyond your beautiful location at Crystal Waters. So Food Connect, for those who don't know, a lot of people in Brisbane, Southeast Queensland have heard of Food Connect, but I suppose there are other areas that haven't. And it was started by my partner, Robert Pekin, who was an ex-dairy farmer. He lost his farm back in the late 90s due to drought and overbearing banks, and ended up losing his 4th generation farm. And through that process had an epiphany that actually he didn't even know the people who drank his milk. Like he was part of an industrialized food system that was so disconnected from, between the grower and the consumer, or the eater, as we like to call people, that he just thought there's got to be a better way. And so he came across the concept of community-supported agriculture, which actually, and recently I just found out, was always known to originate from versions of it from Japan and Switzerland, but it was actually started in the 60s by black farmers in Alabama.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, as a mutual, way for eaters and growers to support each other, particularly through hard times. So community-supported agriculture is basically a concept where a whole bunch of community members pay up front a subscription for a season's worth of healthy fruit and veg, with a focus on organic and natural farming methods and regenerative farming methods. And it's sort of taken off as a concept. And it was always traditionally just one farmer and a bunch of community. And when Rob trialled that system for a number of years, he landed in Brisbane, and he realised that actually it wasn't really that relevant for Brisbane, because we've all got access to anything we want whenever we want here. So how can we build a local food system that has the principles of community-supported agriculture as the foundation, but just operationally includes a lot more than just one farmer, and a lot more eaters. So we now have been going for 14, 15 years as a bit of an experiment, and we're still here. But we always knew that we didn't want to be a not-for-profit or a charity model of food enterprise. We really wanted it to be a business and for it to stand on its own 2 feet economically, because we knew that that would be the most resilient way of hanging around for the long term, being able to engage now 80 farmers and 40-odd food makers who are all locally sourced. So we sort of drew a circle around Brisbane of no more than 400 Ks, depending on what season it is. So we're very lucky here in Southeast Queensland. We have lots of microclimates. We've got the beautiful stone fruit growing areas up at Stanthorpe. We've got amazing Mediterranean veggies coming up from Gympie and Bundaberg and the Mary Valley. And we've got some, all the lovely, fresh greens and whatever much closer to the city. So we've been able to operate a local food system now for that long, and we've withstood the GFC, we've withstood the Brisbane 2011 floods, which we actually thought the local food system would fail during that time because all of southeast Queensland was affected by those floods. But because of the small nature of our farmers, their operations didn't require big, infrastructure or massive machinery to harvest. They could get out into their fields really quickly. They knew the back roads when the highways were cut off so that they could get the produce to us. And I think throughout that whole period of the floods, we only lost one day of productivity, and then at the same time managed to kind of galvanise a community to go and feed the mud army while they were cleaning up Brisbane as well. So
I also remember something about that time too when I remember Rob talking about how, we were a few days away in Brisbane from actually running out of food in the industrial food system. However, in the local food system, it really highlighted the resilience that is there when we embrace a local food system. And I have a sense too that you're feeling that now, that there's a much greater resilience in this local food system. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how Food Connect's responding right now, because it's quite an extraordinary time.
Yeah, interesting. So it's funny because we've been able to prove the model through these crisis points, and then it's funny. People are weird. They drop off, they go away, they enter back into the business as usual food system, and we just hold our heads above water, almost waiting for the next crisis. But we always knew that, we would be ready for, and that we designed a system not just by community-supported agriculture principles, but also by permaculture principles, where, that there was enough diversity in our group of farmers, where if there was a crisis in one geographical area, we could rely on another in our local area. That if, someone had issues with growing something, that another farmer could help them out. We tried to encourage as much mutual cooperation as possible amongst our suppliers, particularly in an industry that's traditionally, very competitive, and they often don't share information. But the COVID pandemic has really brought a new light into the situation, where we haven't really had a climate crisis, although you could argue that COVID is a climate crisis in terms of its macro context. But with our local food supply, what we've seen is that when we had food disappearing off the shelves of supermarkets, that, our sales quadrupled, and we were able to meet the supply without any issues at all. In fact, like looking back now with a month sort of lockdown, in hindsight, we were actually underperforming before. So we had enough fat in the system to be able to meet the challenge and rise to the occasion, and had to employ more staff. And we employed those staff basically from communities. So there are enough people around the Food Connect Shed here in Brisbane who knew us, who were sacked pretty much straight away as soon as lockdown came knocking on the door and said, "I've got a van, I can help with deliveries, sign me up."
Yeah,
so it's all those sort of, that what we call social capital that really kicks in times of crisis. And that's what we've found in terms of not just our food supply, but also the way we operate the business and collectively.
So beyond the Food Connect model of the linking between farmers, it's how you do the bigger picture as well, that I think is fantastic. Your model, you offered as open source. If other people wanted to do this as well, that you went out and paid it forward to help other people set up systems. And so that itself is a mind shift in how you operate business. And then the other one too about, your ownership model. So the way that you bought the building that you're in, and that's a completely different model in itself of how you own or collectively own this space that you're in. Could you maybe talk? That's two big questions there, but maybe pick them how you like, because I think it's the context makes what you're doing even more incredibly amazing. Because it's like this little nested system that it's so many different models that you are, like you say, experimenting with and finding that actually really work and help to create that resilience that can keep things more stable. Like security isn't having a massive great wealth or massive insurance. Security is, like you just said, the community capital, social capital, and there's so much more to it. And I think it's a fascinating, you're calling it an experiment, but it is actually a thing too. It's not.
It is. Yes, it's a way of life. Very real. It's very real. Look, I'll talk a little bit about the open source stuff. So we always knew, we don't own this information. We've borrowed all these ideas from things that resonate with us, and the reading that we do and the people that we've met and spoken to all over the world. And so we just designed in what we really liked, what the sort of future that we wanted to see. And so not all of it worked, of course, like some of it failed terribly. But one of the things that we're, I guess, most proud of is that initially when Food Connect was started, there was no software around to really meet the business rules in terms of the amount of farmers that were supplying us and the way we deliver and engage our customers in terms of, having an online subscription, a regular payment. You could choose from like a 6 weeks, 6 month, 3 months, you could even subscribe for a whole year up front with your food, which was kind of nifty in terms of our cash flow, but also helps families budget with their food budget as well. So if you've got that locked in, you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the year. And so we had to find, so one of our customers, long story short, designed some software for us that we used for quite a number of years. And as groups from around Australia came and visited Food Connect to find out how we did things, we also gave them the software to take with them, because we knew that it wouldn't work if they had to build something themselves. As we all know, software is incredibly expensive to develop. So that eventually transformed into a not-for-profit. We ended up giving it away because we had to make a decision as a business. Did we want to become a software company, or did we want to stay as just Food Connect and be with our community and just share the ideas? And the second thing appealed to us the most. So we gave the software away to a not-for-profit called the Open Food Network. And that not-for-profit has now spread globally. And I was just on the phone to Kirsten Larson last week. She's based in Victoria and she leads the organisation with her partner, Serenity Hill. And they used to get around 10 inquiries a month from farmers and food hubs to use the software. And they're now getting 10 a day. So
I was going to ask you what shift are you seeing globally, or like around Australia, or even globally, as a result of what's happening? Like, are you seeing? Like that's one indicator.
We're seeing a lot of small communities going, okay, how can we do our food better in this circumstance? And a lot of farmers, they've lost markets in this pandemic. The whole tourism and hospitality sectors have literally shut down. So they've had to find alternative markets as well. And so they have turned to Open Food Network in order to sell direct to their local community. And, start developing those skills of marketing and talking to customers and engaging with community. So that's been quite amazing. It's something that we're very excited by, because what it does is the software allows the farmer to transparently engage with their eater every step along the value and supply chain. So, the customers know exactly what they're paying for. The food system is basically democratized. It's all made transparent. When traditionally has relied on being very, opaque and mysterious in terms of how the food gets from the farmer, to the supermarket shelf.
Just on that, on this system, are you finding much support from, I guess, government or other organisations to support? Your laugh kind of answers that question. Because, if we're looking at, the recovery and we're seeing what you're saying, the impact for farmers, impact for community, impact for local businesses, and that it makes sense that any restrictions that there are that kind of make it difficult for this level of the food system to happen need to be lifted, and that there actually be shifting subsidies from industrial farming to these localised farming systems. And are you seeing any shift in that yet, or is there, what voice are you hearing actually helping to promote that as something that could happen? Or is it not something that you want? Would you rather it just be an underground mycelium network of independent, non-controlled?
Yeah, well, there's always a danger, isn't there, when you start putting things in the hands of the higher powers, I guess. And so there is an element of like, no, let's keep this underground. But then what it's not doing is reaching the most vulnerable that need it the most. And so that's where I feel like the government can play a role, or philanthropy. So we haven't been very good to date in being able to speak or walk the talk to investors, philanthropists and government. So we're starting to learn to do that. And I do feel like there is a role for that, for those systems and that knowledge to come into play to help those, marginalised communities especially. And also, but not do it in a way that's sort of top down, really to do it in a way where government gets out of the way and their role is to really facilitate, local communities doing it for themselves. And that's where technology can play a really positive role. So
come back to the idea of working with people who need greater access to food and to look at to where you are and as being a platform for being seen as well, because you're in a hub and you have a lot of other enterprises that exist within the hub that you've created, and one of those is also about the redistribution of food as well. So it feels to me like the way that you're creating this sort of mutual network, your visibility and power to ripple out change in the food system is every day getting more and more, because seeing the success of it, that it works, and that it is not just about the farmer, or it's not just about the consumer, or it's not just about food aid. It is all of those things all together in a response to climate, in a response to our current situation, in a response to drought, in a response to the decimation of small farms in Australia. I mean, it's a response to all those things simultaneously, and many, many more. So, just maybe if you could speak a little bit about that, the food hub, and
yeah. So one of the things that a lot of people probably forget about the food system is that it's so complex. But that's also the beauty of it as well. I mean, there's so many roles for different people to play, particularly in a positive response to COVID, the pandemic, as well as climate change in the food system. We were talking to one of our farmers this week, actually. He does custard apples on the north coast of New South Wales, but he's also a CSIRO statistician. And he's written reports over the years that haven't really even seen the light of day, which basically confirm that, the CO2 emissions that's attributed to the globalised food system is more likely 50% of global emissions than the sort of 30% that's often, put out there in terms of the stats. So when you have a look at the food system from seed right through to the person's plate, and everything in between, particularly the transport and distribution, we sort of, Food Connect decided to focus on the distribution side of things, because if you localize distribution and supply, then you're building a lot more transparency and equity and relationships. It's a relationship-based food system when it's a localized food system rather than just a transactional one when you're looking at long supply chains in the globalized system. So recognizing how complex the food system is, we wanted to invite people into the hub, the Food Connect hub. We call it the Food Connect Shed. So Food Connect only takes up a third of the space for our own operations. And so that allows other people to come in to experiment, do their own experiments, but also to run their own enterprises and not-for-profits out of by being co-located. And that way we can have mutual conversations and I mean, there's not a lot of time to do projects together because we're so focused on our own operations, but just those incidental conversations that happen in the hallways on your way to the toilet or the staff kitchen or whatever. So many ideas get thrown around and things happen out of those. So we've got Oz Harvest there who do food rescue. And they also acknowledge that, food rescue is just addressing the symptoms of the market failure of the larger food system. And they're always looking at ways that they can introduce programs like food literacy and, developing cooking skills and those sorts of things into their programs for marginalised communities, which is really exciting. We've got a commercial kitchen that's set up, which is a community shared kitchen, and we rent it out by the half day to small food entrepreneurs who want to test out their products and sell them into the market. And they, we do have a policy that they try and source as locally as possible or their raw products in the processing of their food. And we also allowed some space for education and events. So when the pandemic lifts, we'll be able to start, sharing our event space again with the local community. Because what we've found is that we've spent 14 years shoving messages down people's throats about we really need to move to a local food system. And you can do that till the cows come home. But unless people have an experience that's positive, then the pennies won't drop. So that's why, over the years, we've taken a lot of our customers out to farms on farm tours to meet our farmers and have that experience of what it's like to be a farmer, and they get to, look them in the eye and ask them all the questions. And it's then that we get the feedback from people saying that's when the penny really dropped for me. And then with the event space, similarly, we invite people in. It could just be a wedding or a 40th or, a film night. And they're in this industrial space in the middle of nowhere in Brisbane, and they go, what's this space all about? And that's when the curiosity leads to, well, this is about a local food system. And that invitation to find out more is a journey for that person. Like, it's an individual journey to realise for themselves that there is another way of doing things that's safe, nutritious, healthy, and fun, So can't forget the element of fun.
Yeah, like how the message actually does reach people at different levels and at what point, and that like through celebration and through fun and through opening up, but still being within that context of a food system, I think is really important. It kind of reminds me too about how we learn best. I'm very mindful of at the moment, how our schooling is happening and how different kind of learning is happening because we're in different contexts and it happens for us as adults too.
That's right.
But I wanted to duck back to what you said about taking people out to farms. So you're talking about the impact that had on the consumers, but what are you seeing that's having an impact on the farmers themselves?
Yeah, so one of the things that we always thought was the most important thing about setting up a local food system was this Farmgate price for farmers, because we know that the industrialised food system often pays farmers below the cost of production. And there's this mantra of get big or get out, that small farmers just can't cut it today in today's market. It's just not possible. We wanted to prove that theory wrong by keeping everything lean in the middle as much as possible, we're able to return a Farmgate price back to farmers that's 4 times the industrial average, basically.
4 times.
So, yeah. We have a business rule that we return 40 to 50 cents in the retail dollar back to our farmers.
So you're saying that it's typically only 10 cents in the dollar that farmers get,
yeah,
or less sometimes even,
or less, depending on what they grow. Yeah. So it's so that triggers farmers to say, oh my God, well then it's all about volume. If I'm only going to get 10 cents in the retail dollar for this, lettuce or whatever, then I've got to grow 5,000 more lettuces in order to be competitive in this market.
The quantity instead of quality.
That's right. Yeah. And that's where you find people, compromising on their growing methods. They start using chemicals, they start growing monocultures, they, forget about biodiversity on their farms. So and that's where we run into the environmental problems that we're seeing in the food system. But that isn't the only driving factor. While money is important, what we've found is that just being acknowledged for doing a good job is more rewarding than anything. And having a whole bunch of people from the city who know nothing about how food's grown coming and saying thank you really does it switches a light on for them, for the farmers. And we've had so much amazing feedback from them over the years about how they would have given up had they known that they weren't feeding those people.
So that valuing the person is not just the monetary value, but the personal value, because the messaging has always been, particularly with even the monetary valuing, that it's really what you're doing is really not worth that much. And if you've got any wits about you, you'd be going to the city and getting a real job, kind of. Yeah,
so, which most of them are doing now.
And so
mass migration.
So have you got the figures on what's the average age of farmers these days, and is that in the kind of farming that you're doing? You're seeing that there is a new farmer that's emerging, or and sort of size of farms that you work with now too, in and around.
So the farms, we only have about 1 or 2 kind of what you would call sort of industrial scale organic farms on our books, and they're sort of like our backup plan if our small farmers are having issues. But most of our small farmers are on very small plots. Like it's not a lot of land, and a lot of them are mixed. So a lot of them are doing sort of vertical integration with animals as well as vegetables, and keeping it nice and small and diverse.
So what you're really saying there is if people would, had a small farm or even a hobby farm or even some really intense kind of urban farm, and did some kind of, in a way, a really diverse permaculture design on it, that they could then connect in with you and start to create a livelihood from their small farm.
So we've got that at the moment. We have about we have 80 farmers roughly on our books, but in any given week, we're probably directly talking to about 20 or 30, depending on the season. And I would say about a third of those are now urban farmers. Wow. So it was a few years ago now where we an honours student came to us from UQ saying, I want to do a project with you guys. What can I do? And we said, we want you to write the Brisbane food plan. We don't have time to do it. We've got all the ideas, but we don't have time to write it. So he did that, and he looked at Brisbane. Okay, where should you get your food from, Brisbane? And he looked at it through the zones in permaculture. So looking at the house, looking at Brisbane as zone 0, and where we should get our fresh greens from, and herbs should really come from our own backyard. So we had a 10-year plan that by the end of the 10 years, we would be most of our customers would be growing their own fresh lettuces and herbs. They wouldn't need to go to Food Connect to buy them. And then zone 1 is sort of like the sort of harder things to grow, harder vegetables and fruits to grow, and so on and so forth. And, the grains and the meat and whatever are further out. And so it's not true to the permaculture zoning, but it's more of a guide to get people to think about appropriate scale and uses for for the city context. But we also used some other lenses through which we viewed food in Brisbane. So we looked at a social justice lens, we looked at the environmental impact, we looked at the economic lens, like who gets paid for doing what, how do we keep the money circulating locally, because over the years we've some of the research that we've done or the reading that we've done shows that if you can keep money circulating locally, you're actually creating a 3 to 4 times multiplier effect compared to when you're just putting your money into a supermarket and off into some invisible shareholders. So you're actually doing more for your local economy and your local community by keeping your dollars local. And we also looked at the food system, Brisbane Food Plan, from a health, through a preventative health lens. And we got some students from Griffith Uni, nutrition students, to analyse the average Food Connect customer and their intake of fruit and veg compared to, you know, conventional Australian citizens and what they normally do, the average diet. And they found that, you know, just from a preventative health point of view, that Food Connect customers consume 75% more fruit and veg than your average Australian.
Wow, that's significant.
Yeah, it has a huge impact on the health system.
Yeah.
Especially when it's, you know, grown on organic farms with no chemicals. You know, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal, really. You know, and you can't measure the benefit economically of this, really, can you? Because it is it's
a system.
In everything. That's right. Yeah. And so I think, you know, it's.
And every piece in it, Morag, is interdependent on the other.
Yeah.
For it to all be healthy and functioning, you've got to address every complex piece in the system all the time, and that can be really hard.
Yeah.
And so that's why we've always been open, because we wanted to share everything we can and everything that we know, so that people can go, oh, I identify with that piece in the food system. I'm going to take that bit and run with it and create positive change through my talents or passion.
And I guess too that, you know, taking an entrepreneurial type approach to it, like you were saying, and building in that adaptability and the flexibility and like constantly being able to kind of shift and change and move as you go, but having it being as a social entrepreneur. How do you say that? That
social entrepreneur.
Yeah.
That's what we call
it as an adjective for the business, but it wasn't.
Anyway. It's a generic term that's used a lot these days.
So how do you define it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it basically anybody who's putting planet and people before profit, or even on an equal basis to profit. Let's just start there. It basically it turns the mindset from an extractive mindset to a regenerative mindset. And so most social entrepreneurs out there are doing business for good. That's basically the short kind of version of it. But essentially they're wanting to use their entrepreneurial skills in a way that actually benefits other people and the environment, and, you know, also provides them with a living. And so it's basically just how business should be, in my opinion. Like, every business should be an ethical business. You should have a social and environmental license to operate, no matter what you do. And essentially, that's what social enterprise is all about.
Yeah, and your work that you're doing with the Queensland Social Entrepreneur, is it entrepreneurship?
Queensland Social Enterprise Council.
Enterprise. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I've got to get my language right around this. So you're, what are you currently doing with that at the moment? Is it more gathering the information, or are you doing education through that? And
so, one of the main purposes of QSEC is it's always been run by members. So it basically started because a small group of social entrepreneurs in Brisbane decided that that they didn't have a voice, that there were a lot of people in the social impact and innovation space, particularly with intermediaries financing social impact and governments and the like, who were speaking on behalf of us but weren't really telling the true story. So a bunch of entrepreneurs got together and said, let's form our own sort of peak body, so to speak. It was sort of like an industry association, really. And so basically what we do is we get together whenever we can, online these days, and we advocate both to investors and governments to create socially friendly policies in terms of business and legislation. So recently in Queensland, they've implemented a social procurement policy, they call it. So they're trying to educate buyers right across government, because governments spend a lot of money with businesses in procuring services and goods. And so the idea is, if they have a social procurement policy, that when buyers go out seeking services or goods, that they actually can tick the box that supplier is a social enterprise or has some kind of impact, social or environmental impact, by purchasing with them. And that can be a really powerful way to drive social change, is by getting large institutions to spend their money more wisely with the people who can provide services. Unfortunately, at the moment, because the government buy is so huge, a lot of the buyers have been used to just going with one big multinational who can do all the things for them. But what they're having to do is sort of redesign their contracts so that they can apportion some of the money towards the social enterprises that can fulfill those contracts. So that's one aspect of what we do. We also just are there for each other. So we've had a lot of webinars over the last, month in particular, just trying to support each other through all the different programs that are out there in terms of help for businesses during the pandemic. But also recently we've set up a national alliance of member-run peak bodies like USEC, and it's been amazing. We're basically working on a position paper at the moment to present to the federal government, so that we've got a voice in the post-COVID recovery, because what we need to be really careful of in the recovery phase after the pandemic is that business as usual doesn't take over again. And we're already seeing some rhetoric coming out of Canberra saying that, particularly Angus Taylor saying that it's going to be a gas-led recovery. And that's the last thing we need right now is, more damage to the climate in a climate-induced pandemic.
That's right. And so, these voices need to come out so strongly, and we need to be ready. So it's so fantastic to hear that you are talking in that way and ready to speak up, because it's absolutely what we need to be doing, and thinking about how communities transition. And that's kind of the other part of your work too, that with the next economy, that you're working with communities transitioning. Well, it started some time ago, transitioning from the fossil fuel economy, but the current situation, on top of all of that, gives it even more reason to focus on a transition to a different way. And so what are the ways that you're working with communities to help them to transition, and what kind of things are you working with them, talking about, and what kind of transition is coming out of those conversations?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I've only recently joined Amanda Carl at the Next Economy, and she's obviously well known for her amazing work in regional communities and talking about economic transition. I mean, the initial conversation is around energy. So most of our work has been in coal communities around Queensland, and talking to those communities about what kind of future they want to see, and what sort of sectors need to be supported, in addition to renewable energy and other projects. So there's so many opportunities that are just lying under the surface for a lot of communities, but because they've been dominated by one particular industry, it's often at the expense of everything else. And so you'll often see coal communities, vehemently hold on to the coal, because they know that all the industries that have popped up to support that major industry will also fall over if you take that away. So how can we build more resilience into our local regional economies by supporting as many diverse sectors as possible? And there's so many innovative ideas that have come out of our conversations. We've got regenerative farmers really starting to step up, talking about new food systems. We've got a lot of people talking about, incredible opportunities around waste and recycling and upcycling. And there's also incredible talk and action around small manufacturing. So if the global system suddenly comes to a halt and China locks down and we can no longer import stuff, what can we do to produce our own stuff locally? What small industries can we get going to start bringing in more skills and more money into the local regional economy? So it's only just a beginning, but we've seen some incredibly positive conversations come out of those regions recently. And the beauty of it is that the community are coming up with these ideas themselves. They're being asked the question. Someone stopped and decided to take the time to ask the questions. And there's so much wisdom in there, and we don't need a big top-down approach. We just need the people in government, in big government, to say, okay, guys, where do you need the support? And let's work together to do that.
And I was just going to say too that, I think because of what's happening now, because we're seeing the cracks in the system and how vulnerable it is, that these conversations somehow seem to be a lot more acceptable now than they have been. Because, these conversations are not new, are they? I mean, let's face it, these are things that we've been talking about for a long time. And, a lot of us have just been trying to keep it going. And all of a sudden, there's a new awareness globally about the importance of these types of conversations happening in communities. So that's something that's happening in regional communities of the next economy. What are some of the things, just from your experience of doing all the things that you do, that people who are sitting maybe down the street from you and in an urban environment, what are some of the ways that you think they can really support this movement of regeneration and resilience and helping to support the recovery after COVID, to not just go back to business as usual, but to be something else and to support that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I often wonder myself, but I think they already know and they already have the answers themselves because they've been forced into isolation. We've all realised that, there was a bit of rhetoric at the start that, we're all in this together, we're all in the same boat. And I read something recently where they said, well, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same ocean. We're all in the same pandemic ocean. But some of us are in little boats just trying to stay afloat, with a leak, with a hole in the boat and with buckets, trying to, get the water out and just survive and get to land. Others are in big cruise ships and they're fine, and they're enjoying the downturn. So if anything, the pandemic has really acutely highlighted the inequities in our system. So I think in terms of knowing that it's not everyone's equal in this, some people are loving the home time, loving spending time with their kids and whatever, and cooking from scratch and enjoying all those things. Other people are just trying to figure out where they're going to get their next meal from. Particularly, I feel for people in the inner city who are in these one-bedroom apartment blocks, how are they coping? It must be so isolating for them. So I guess one of the things, a few things that I would sort of do, I guess, would be, that I've noticed people doing actually, is particularly in our suburb, we've had people out on their driveways every Sunday afternoon having dinner. So that's been kind of cute. There's been a few, new stories on the news about that. I think there's just this concept of mutual aid, is that, if we can find ways to support the elderly, like I think the the elderly are very vulnerable in this particular, not just physically health-wise, but also emotionally vulnerable. And I think, the idea of the care army that came out from the state government was a good idea. I'm not sure how it's worked on the ground, but communities are already doing that themselves in many ways too, is just to look out for each other, even if all you're doing is looking out for either side of your neighbour. Sharing tips like you do at 5 o'clock every afternoon on Facebook or YouTube, like how to grow stuff, how to cook with things, how to use the whole pumpkin, including the vines and the leaves and everything, finding ways to be more resilient in your day-to-day existence is really empowering. It's not just good to know, and it's not just fun. It's actually gives you agency. It gives you power. And one of the things that I've found in my years at Food Connect is we've been able to develop skills, homesteading skills we call them, but what it actually does is it reduces your reliance on the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday income to support yourself, because you're able to subsidise your income by being self-sufficient in a lot of ways.
And then that releases time and space in your life to do other things,
to pursue things that really matter to you.
Yes.
Yeah, like the caring economy comes into play, doesn't it? Yeah. And we know that's never been attributed a dollar value. But I always say to Rob, what would happen if all the women, mostly women, who are the carers in households around the world, what would happen if we all just went on strike one day? The economy would stop.
The
economy would stop.
What if we all started to work from home a lot more, and what if our work week was 3 days a week, and what if there was the universal basic income? There's all these different questions that are kind of coming up that are and eating differently, and like you're saying, a different type of sense of community, like the ripple effect of that too, that once you start to feel a greater sense of connectedness to your community and therefore to your place, then you start to behave differently, don't you, in your community and place, and the caring then extends beyond into your natural environment, into your water system, to your bioregion, and to the farmers that are in your bioregion, or to the Indigenous communities that are part of that have been there forever,
Yes.
And so our relationships change, and once one set of relationships has a kind of a reorientation, everything starts to ripple out from there. And so it's this. We are in a process right now of quite profound systems change. And while there's massive suffering, there is also everything's up in the air. It feels, and we have a chance to kind of catch things differently as they start to fall and settle back into place, and have like that word you were saying before, agency. We have the agency to be influencers in that from the community, from our neighbourhoods, and to speak up and say, actually, you know what, we were on this train of life before, following what we thought was the right thing to do, but now we've kind of all just been bumped off that, and we've seen that there is actually a different way of doing things, a different way to live, a different way to have an economic system, a different way to feed ourselves, a different way to relate, different way to educate our children. We've actually had an experience that we may not like all of that, with maybe bits that we'd like to choose, but as we kind of pack things back together again, as we move out of this crisis, it's going to be different. And I really encourage people to speak up on what it is that they value and find important, and want to embrace as we move forward from now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've as a society, I think we kind of lost sight, didn't we, of what really matters, and what COVID has done is really remind us that, at the end of the day, it's looking after each other, and whether you have a family or whether you're living on your own and you exist in an apartment complex, that is a community. And how you relate to your neighbours is just as valuable as your expertise that you contribute after you've when you're in the real economy, as they call it. And I often think that women kind of get this stuff a little bit better at times because especially women, who've experienced childbirth or, been in a caring role where they've had to sort of interrupt their own careers to step into a caring role for a close family member or family or child, because you have that. We've often experienced that short circuit to our normal life, and often what happens in that process is that you realise that you actually don't want to go back to that normal life again. You actually want to explore a little bit of both. What does a bit of both look like in a healthy, balanced way? Get off that hamster wheel and start, bringing more meaning into your own life, but also pursuing your career goals at the same time. It's not about having it all. It's about having a little bit, of what you want. Yeah.
And just thinking too then about, it's a redefinition of our relationship with ourselves and what we value in our own lives and in our families. But it's also, bringing it back to say Food Connect. It's, our community is also the members of our food system. And so, by having a close relationship with something like Food Connect, then you don't feel isolated in your apartment because you are interconnected.
That's right. Yeah. You've got to get out of your apartment and go and grab your box from your local city cousin.
Yeah.
And you might just happen to bump into people on the way. Yeah, that's right. Your world has expanded.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that sense of belonging. And, I don't know if you get that with Coles and Woolies.
Not quite.
Even though they have loyalty programs.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a sense of brand loyalty, but it's different. It's absolutely different, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
When it comes to actually feeling cared for and nurtured and connected and the relationships. And I think we are finding that the richness of our relationships is flourishing right now in many ways. So
it is. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me this morning. And,
you're welcome, Morag. It's been great.
We kind of went so many.
We did. We went everywhere.
from global to local, but that's kind of a point when we're exploring systems change. That, the micro is the macro.
Is the macro. Yeah.
One and the same thing. So thank you so much, and
you're welcome.
Look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thanks, Morag. Yeah. Lovely to spend time with you.
You too. So thanks for tuning in to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast today. It's been a real pleasure to have your company. I invite you to subscribe and receive notification of each new weekly episode with more wonderful stories, ideas, inspiration, and common sense for living and working regeneratively. Anchor positive permaculture thinking and design into action in this changing world. I'm including a transcript below and a link also to my 4-part permaculture series, really looking at what is permaculture and how to make it your livelihood too. So join me again in the next episode where we talk with another fascinating guest. I look forward to seeing you there.